The Ottomans and France. These two great powers of EU4 are nations that not many people like to fight in early game. Both of these nations can crush you if you take them on early, which is why there's so many memes about just how powerful they are. Have you ever thought to yourself though, what if these two nations allied? Imagine if you had to take on both the Ottomans and France if you're just a small Balkan nation. This is probably a task that most skilled EU4 players would not want to take on, and could only do it with some good allies. But in the game, France and the Ottomans being allies is actually quite common, and I've seen it quite a lot in my campaigns. Out of all the nation relationships though, this one just fascinates me the most. And the relationship between the Ottomans and France is unique both historically and in-game. Rarely do you see two ideological opposing nations get on so well, unless it's under extreme circumstances. And the reason they do ally historically actually makes sense when you come to think of it. And it was the first official, non-ideological alliance to happen in history. Have you ever wanted someone to pilgrimage to Ulm? Well, if we get to 100,000 subscribers, Leif and I will be playing EU4 next to the Ulm Cathedral. So if you want to see that happen, make sure to click that button. Right, let's get into the video and delve into the Ottoman-French alliance. So firstly, let's delve into the background of the Ottomans, so we can get an understanding of the Ottomans' goals and ambitions. The Ottomans' rise was during the 13th century within Anatolia. The first leader of the Ottomans, Osman, was a charismatic leader, and he was able to convince warriors to join him with the promise of gold. Given the region at the time was controlled by petty kings with very weak power, warrior kings proved effective in this political arena. Another reason why the Ottomans were able to gain power so quickly is the idea of the Gaza thesis. This suggested that Muslim warriors joined Osman to fight the Christians. But the fact the Ottomans recruited Byzantine troops and put little pressure on the Christians to convert to Islam, this heavily contradicts the Gaza thesis of being a credible solution. The founder of the Ottomans, Osman, also would cooperate with any person from any religion for his own personal benefit, and perhaps these ideas of Osman passed down through the generations of the sultans. The Ottomans built a multinational empire and managed to expand their territory. Their first encounters with the French was at the end of the 14th century. Just pausing here and looking at a bit of the background of France, it was a Christian power that had its struggles with England, and the French focus during this time was mainly to take back English land on the European continent. So France didn't really have any reason to have any relations with the Ottomans at this time. And between 1400 and 1444, there wasn't really any sort of significant relations these two nations had, but we will talk about it in brief to give you some context. We start in 1396, which is when France first encountered the Ottomans on a crusade. The Hungarian king sent a delegation to Paris and described just how horrible the Ottomans were, and they wreaked havoc on Christian land. The French king, Charles VI, having secured a peace of England, said it was his duty to protect the Christian lands in the east, and sent a force to help fight the Ottomans. Although this crusade was a massive failure, and at the Battle of Nicopolis, many French soldiers were slain by the Ottomans. Clearly the Crusaders didn't have a good EU4 discipline advisor. After this, no new French expedition was launched to prevent the Ottomans from expanding in the Balkans, and in fact they renewed their war with England. Therefore, leading up to the start date of EU4, the relations between the two countries were poor, and the crusade did live on in the minds of the French people, who certainly mourned the dead. Going beyond the start date of EU4, not much happened between the two nations for a long period of time. When the Ottomans took Constantinople in 1453, the Pope at the time, Pius II, was in shock and was determined to defend the Christian faith. The Christians, although concerned, did not organise another crusade against the Ottomans. A few decades later, it was noted that the Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid, sent a diplomat to France to negotiate the release of his brother, but the French king refused to see the Ottoman diplomat. During the 15th century, France and the Ottomans therefore did not really have any significant relationship, and it was entirely dependent on the rulers at the time. The next century, however, would be a completely different story. Between 1500 and 1525, France was actively seeking alliances to balance a power within Europe that was heavily weighted towards the Habsburgs, and specifically Charles V. France rightfully was threatened by the Habsburgs, and so was able to ally Poland in 1524. Perhaps France would have never specifically pursued an alliance with the Ottomans had it not been for the Battle of Pavia in 1525. The first documented contacts we have between France and the Ottomans happens just after 1525, when the French King Francis was captured by Charles V. You can imagine that the capture of the French king must have sent shockwaves throughout France, and probably made the French people feel even more vulnerable than they already were, especially when they were surrounded by the Habsburgs. This marks the moment when France and the Ottomans became politically involved with one another. There's no doubt this reaching out to the Ottoman Empire was an act of desperation by Francis, but over time France got away from the Christendom ideal, which is for all Christian princes to promote peace and unity in the Christian world and attack the infidels. But times were changing, and this can be seen in two aspects. Firstly, the rise of Protestants played a role in the division of the Christian world. Therefore, this world wasn't as unified as it once was, and there just wasn't this togetherness we saw back in the day. So maybe this Christian ideology began to waver because of this. Secondly, we also see the rise of Machiavelli's ideas, which completely goes against the Christian ideas. And in summary, Machiavelli's ideas are when you should do anything, including breaking the Christian ideal, to rise to the top, and do what's best for your state in the long term. When Francis was released from captivity, and refused to recognise the Treaty of Madrid in 1526, the Habsburgs declared war on France once more. Meanwhile, the Ottomans dealt a major blow to the Habsburgs in the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, which led to Francis seeing the Ottomans as potentially more of an ally. Between 1526 and 1530, the Ottoman Sultan and Francis exchanged letters, both acknowledging their friendship with one another. Eventually, the two nations exchanged embassies in the 1530s, and the relations between the two nations continued to improve from there. There's no doubt in my mind that Francis's hatred towards Charles V intensified his relations with the Ottoman Empire. The alliance was made official in 1536, with a political and economic agreement between the two nations. In EU4, therefore, it's understandable to eventually see these two nations ally in game, and perhaps there should be some events surrounding these two nations' relations, so that it does happen in game. I believe the Ottomans do lack a bit of flavour in EU4, and adding some things about the relations between these two nations would make playing the Ottomans or France more enjoyable. After the agreement was signed, the Ottomans and France worked together to attack the Habsburg Empire. There was a bit of tension when Charles and Francis brokered a peace, and it led to the Ottoman Sultan being confused and suspicious. But this peace broke down, and Francis again turned towards the Ottomans for help. Some notable parts of the alliance is when the Ottoman captain, Barbarossa, was able to siege Nice together with the French, and after the siege, Barbarossa was even offered shelter in the French port. The alliance provided strategic support to, and effectively protected, the Kingdom of France from the ambitions of Charles V. It also gave the opportunity for the Ottoman Empire to become involved in European diplomacy, and gain prestige in its European dominions. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're watching near the upload time, I am streaming over at Twitch. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.